It was Christmas Eve in Millbrook, Connecticut, and Margaret Sullivan's hands trembled as she read the text messages on her phone. One by one, her 3 children had canceled their plans to come home for Christmas dinner. The small screen blurred as tears filled her eyes. "Sorry, Mom. Emergency at the hospital. Can't make it this year. Will. Major real estate deal closing tomorrow. Rain check? Love you, Sarah. Last-minute business trip to Tokyo. Next time, Mike." The phone slipped from Margaret's fingers, clattering onto the kitchen counter. The room began to spin, and her chest tightened. 45 years of Christmas traditions, shattered by 3 brief messages. The smell of roasting turkey filled the air as darkness crept into the corners of her vision. The last thing she heard was the timer of her oven buzzing before everything went black. She awoke to the concerned face of her neighbor, Betty Wilson, and the sound of paramedics entering her Victorian home. "Margaret, thank goodness you're coming around. I heard the smoke alarm and found you unconscious on the kitchen floor." "The turkey," Margaret mumbled, trying to sit up. "Don't worry about the turkey," Betty said firmly. "These nice gentlemen need to take you to the hospital." At Millbrook General, Dr. Peterson examined Margaret while nurses fussed over her vital signs. "Mrs. Sullivan, your collapse was likely caused by a combination of stress and low blood sugar. Have you been eating properly?" "I've been busy preparing for Christmas dinner," Margaret replied, her voice small. "For nothing, as it turns out." While the doctor reviewed her chart, Margaret noticed a document that had fallen from her purse during the commotion. Reaching for it, her heart nearly stopped again. It was an email, accidentally printed by her son Michael, discussing plans to sell her house. The words "she can't live alone anymore" and "excellent development opportunity" jumped off the page. "Mrs. Sullivan," Dr. Peterson said gravely, "given your age and today's incident, I'm concerned about you living alone in that big house. Perhaps it's time to consider." "I'm fine," Margaret cut him off, quickly hiding the paper. It was just a dizzy spell. As she sat in the hospital bed, memories of last Christmas flooded her mind. James, her beloved husband of 50 years, had still been alive then. Even in the final stages of cancer, he'd insisted on wearing his ridiculous Santa tie and telling his corny jokes. "Promise me you'll keep them together, Maggie," he'd whispered that night. "Our family is my greatest gift." The drive home from the hospital was lonely and dark. Snow was beginning to fall as Betty helped her inside. "Are you sure you don't want to spend the night at my house?" her neighbor asked worriedly. "No, thank you," Margaret replied, forcing a smile. "I have things to do." Alone in her kitchen, Margaret surveyed the damage. The turkey was ruined, the side dishes half prepared, and 5 decades of Christmas memories seemed to mock her from every corner. She picked up a framed photo from the counter. Last year's Christmas, James's final one. His warm smile and the love in his eyes brought fresh tears to her own. "I'm sorry, James," she whispered. "I failed to keep them together." But as she stood there, something shifted in Margaret's heart. She straightened her shoulders and wiped her eyes. James hadn't raised her to be a quitter. She might be alone this Christmas, but she was still Margaret Sullivan, the woman who had survived the Great Depression, put herself through college, and raised 3 children while teaching full-time. With determined movements, she began to clean up the kitchen. She would still set her table, light her candles, and honor the traditions she and James had built together. Her children might have forgotten the meaning of family, but she hadn't. As the snow fell harder outside her windows, Margaret had no way of knowing that this Christmas Eve would change her life forever. Sometimes, she would later reflect, the greatest gifts come disguised as our deepest disappointments. After cleaning the kitchen, Margaret felt drawn to the attic. She hadn't been up there since James passed away, but something told her it was time. The wooden stairs creaked under her feet as she climbed, flashlight in hand. The beam of light swept across dusty boxes and old furniture until it landed on James's desk. She'd always wondered why he'd insisted on keeping it up here instead of in his study. As she approached, memories of him sitting there late at night flooded back. "Just working on some important papers, Maggie," he'd always say with that mysterious smile of his. Margaret pulled open the top drawer, and her breath caught. Inside was a stack of documents she'd never seen before. The first was a bank statement from an account she didn't know existed. The balance made her sit down hard in James's old chair. $200,000? She whispered to the empty attic. James, what were you planning? As she dug deeper, she found something even more disturbing. Financial records for her son Michael's company. According to these documents, he was nearly bankrupt. The company had been hemorrhaging money for months, and there were signs of desperate attempts to cover it up. Oh, Michael, Margaret sighed, her heart breaking for her eldest. Why didn't you come to me? The next folder contained newspaper clippings about Sarah. Her daughter's smiling face appeared in real estate announcements, but there were also smaller articles. Drunk driving arrests carefully hidden from the family, rehabilitation visits kept secret. William's folder was the thinnest, but what it contained was perhaps the most shocking. Her youngest son, the dedicated doctor, was under investigation for ethical violations at his hospital. He'd been falsifying research data to secure grants. Mrs. Sullivan, a voice called from downstairs, making her jump. Margaret, are you home? She quickly gathered the documents and hurried down the attic stairs. When she opened the front door, she found a family of 4 standing in the snow. A man, woman, and 2 children around 10 years old. I'm David Thompson, the man said, looking embarrassed. Our car broke down just up the street. We saw your lights on and... We're freezing, one of the children interrupted, earning a stern look from her mother. Emma, the woman scolded, then turned to Margaret. I'm Ashley, and this is our daughter Emma and her twin brother Ethan. We were trying to make it to my sister's house in Hartford, but this storm... Margaret looked at their snow-covered clothes and red cheeks. Something about the woman's face seemed familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. Please come in, Margaret said, stepping aside. I have plenty of food, even if my own family couldn't make it. As the Thompsons entered her home, Margaret noticed Emma looking at the family photos on the wall. You have a big family, the girl said. I used to, Margaret replied, then quickly added, let me get you all some hot chocolate. In the kitchen, Margaret's hands shook as she prepared the drinks. The documents from the attic weighed heavily in her pocket. Her children's secrets swirled in her mind, mixing with questions about James's hidden account and what he might have known. The sound of laughter from the living room caught her attention. Through the doorway, she could see the twins examining her Christmas tree while their parents tried to get cell service. No signal at all, David announced. The storm must have knocked out the towers. Ashley approached the kitchen, offering to help. As she stepped into the light, Margaret suddenly realized why she looked familiar. But it couldn't be. Could it? Before she could process this thought, her phone buzzed. Another message from Michael. Mom, is there any chance we could talk about the house after the holidays? There's an interesting opportunity we should discuss. Margaret's hand tightened around the phone. Now she knew exactly why her son was so desperate to sell her home. The question was, what would James have wanted her to do about it? While the Thompsons warmed up in the living room, Margaret went to answer another call from Michael. She stopped short in the hallway when she heard his voice already coming from somewhere. Her tablet, which Emma had been using to look up road conditions, was on speaker. Everything's set, Sarah, Michael was saying. Once we get Mom into Cedar Grove Retirement Home, we can close the deal with the developers. They're offering $7 million for the property. I don't know, Mike, Sarah replied, her words slightly slurred. This feels wrong. Dad loved this house. Dad's gone and Mom can't manage alone. You saw how she's been lately. Besides, I need this deal. The company. Margaret's sharp intake of breath must have alerted Emma to her presence. The girl quickly turned off the tablet, looking guilty. I'm sorry, Mrs. Sullivan. I didn't mean to. Before Margaret could respond, Ashley appeared in the hallway. Mrs. Sullivan, are you all right? You look pale. Margaret steadied herself against the wall, her chest tight. I just need to sit down for a moment. As Ashley helped her to a chair, recognition flickered in her eyes. You don't remember me, do you? From St. Mary's Orphanage, 1985? Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Little Ashley Bennett? The girl we almost... The girl you and Mr. Sullivan tried to adopt, Ashley finished, before the paperwork got tangled up and I aged out of the system. The room seemed to spin again, but this time it wasn't from shock or anger. It was from the strange way life had of coming full circle. Mom, Emma called from the living room. "Come quick, I found something else." On the tablet screen was a document with Michael's signature and what appeared to be James's signature below it, dated 3 months after his death. "That's impossible," Margaret whispered. James was already gone. David, who worked in financial security, examined the document. "This is definitely forged. These authorization papers, someone's trying to force a sale of the property." Margaret's breathing became rapid and shallow. The room started to blur. "Mrs. Sullivan needs her medication," Ashley said firmly, recognizing the signs of an anxiety attack. "Where do you keep it?" "Top drawer, kitchen," Margaret managed to say. As Ashley hurried to get the medicine, Ethan spoke up from where he'd been quietly observing. "You can't let them take your house, Mrs. Sullivan. It's not right." "No," Margaret said once her breathing steadied. "It's not right at all." David was already making notes about the forged documents on his phone. "This is fraud, Mrs. Sullivan. As a cybersecurity expert, I can help you prove it." "Please," Emma begged. "Let us help. We can stay tonight because of the storm, and tomorrow—" "You don't understand," Margaret interrupted. "These are my children, despite everything." "We understand family better than most," Ashley said softly. "Sometimes the people who should love us the most are the ones who hurt us the worst. But sometimes, Mrs. Sullivan, family is who we choose." The words hit Margaret like a physical force. She remembered James saying something similar the day they'd tried to adopt Ashley. "Family isn't just blood, Maggie. It's love and choice and sometimes just plain luck." Emma's tablet pinged with a weather alert. The storm was worsening. Roads were closing. "You'll have to stay the night," Margaret said, making a decision. "And tomorrow we'll figure this out together." As she went to prepare rooms for her unexpected guests, Margaret heard Michael's voice on her answering machine. "Mom, call me back. It's urgent. The developers need an answer by New Year's." She deleted the message without a second thought. For the first time since James died, she felt something besides grief and loneliness. She felt hope. And somewhere, she was sure James was smiling that mysterious smile of his, knowing his plans were finally falling into place. After getting the Thompsons settled in the guest rooms, Margaret returned to the attic. She needed to know what else James had left behind. As she searched through his desk again, her fingers found a hidden compartment underneath the top drawer. Inside was a sealed envelope with, "For Maggie, when they try to take our home," written in James's familiar handwriting. Margaret's hands shook as she opened it. "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, then our children have finally shown their cards. I've watched them changing over the years, becoming people we never raised them to be. Michael's greed, Sarah's addiction, William's compromised ethics. It breaks my heart, but I knew this day would come. That's why I've been preparing. The account you've discovered contains everything we saved over the years, plus the insurance money. Don't let them know about it. They'd only waste it like they've wasted their own inheritances. But there's something else you need to know. Do you remember Ashley Bennett, the little girl we tried to adopt? I never stopped keeping track of her. She's done well for herself, became a teacher just like you. I'm leaving her half of that money. She's the daughter we should have had. You'll find all the legal paperwork in the safe behind my old fishing photo. The combination is the day we first met, 11/22/48. And Maggie? Don't let them bully you into leaving our home. I built this place with my own hands, dreaming of the family we'd raise here. Maybe it's not too late for it to become a home filled with love again, just in a different way than we imagined. All my love, James." Margaret had to stop reading several times to wipe her eyes. Even now, James was taking care of her. A soft knock at the attic door made her look up. Ashley stood there, holding 2 cups of tea. "I couldn't sleep," Ashley said. "Mind if I join you?" As Ashley sat down, Margaret noticed she was holding something. "I found this in my old teaching files," Ashley explained, pulling out a yellowed photograph. "It's from the day you and Mr. Sullivan came to meet me at St. Mary's." The photograph showed a younger James and Margaret with a small girl between them, all smiling at the camera. Margaret remembered that day perfectly, how excited they'd been, how devastated when the adoption fell through. "James made me your godmother," Margaret said quietly, showing Ashley the letter. "He never gave up on you." Ashley's eyes filled with tears as she read. All these years I wondered if you'd forgotten about me. I even named Emma after your mother." "James never forgot," Margaret said, "and neither did I. We just lost our way after the adoption failed." "Life has a strange way of bringing people together again," Ashley said. "When our car broke down, I almost didn't recognize the house, but then I saw the Christmas star in the window, the same one from that photo." Margaret glanced at the old glass star, still hanging where James had placed it 40 years ago. He always said it would guide people home. A plan was beginning to form in Margaret's mind. She looked at the letter again, then at Ashley. James wanted this house to be filled with love again. Maybe there's a way to make that happen. "Mrs. Sullivan?" "Please, call me Margaret, and I have an idea, but I'll need your help. You're a teacher, and I was a teacher, and this house, it's too big for one person, but maybe it's just big enough for..." Before she could finish, Emma's voice called up from below. "Mom, Grandma Margaret, come quick. The news says we might be snowed in for days." Margaret and Ashley looked at each other, surprised by Emma's use of grandma, then burst out laughing. "Well," Margaret said, standing up, "I guess we have time to work out the details." As they descended the attic stairs, Margaret tucked James's letter into her pocket. For the first time since finding those text messages, she felt truly grateful for this Christmas Eve. Sometimes the worst moments in life led to the best beginnings. The next morning, Margaret's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Michael had discovered something was wrong. "Mom, what do you mean you're not selling? The developers need an answer today." Michael's voice echoed through the speaker. "I've seen the forged documents, Michael," Margaret said calmly, "the ones with your father's signature from after he died." Silence filled the line. "Then who told you about those?" "Does it matter? What matters is that you committed fraud." "Mom, you don't understand. My company is about to collapse. I need this deal. And I need a son who doesn't try to steal his mother's home." The line went dead. Within an hour, Margaret's email inbox filled with messages from lawyers. David looked over the threatening emails at the kitchen table. "They're trying to declare you mentally incompetent, claiming the hospital visit yesterday proves you can't live alone." "Can they do that?" Emma asked, bringing Margaret her morning coffee. "They can try," David replied. "But Mrs. Sullivan has allies now." The doorbell rang. Sarah stood on the porch, looking hungover but determined. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, then noticed Ashley in the background. "Who's that?" "Come in, Sarah, there's a lot you need to know." Over the next hour, Margaret showed Sarah everything. James's letter, the evidence of Michael's fraud, the plans for the house. Sarah's hands shook as she read her father's words. "I've been so stupid," Sarah whispered. "The drinking, the lies. Dad knew everything, didn't he?" "He knew," Margaret said softly, "but he never stopped loving you." "Michael's gone crazy, Mom. He's hiring lawyers saying you're unfit. William's backing him up with some medical opinion." "And where do you stand?" Sarah looked around the room, at the Christmas decorations, at the old photos, at Ashley and her family. "I stand with you, Mom. I'll testify about Michael's plans, about everything." Margaret hugged her daughter. "It won't be easy. Michael won't give up." "Neither will we," David interrupted. "I've contacted some colleagues in cybersecurity. We're building a case." Emma, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. "I recorded Michael's phone call this morning. Is that helpful?" "Emma," Ashley scolded. "That's not." "Actually," David said, "in this state that's completely legal and very helpful." The day passed in a blur of phone calls and legal documents. William left angry voicemails about betraying family. Michael's lawyers sent cease and desist letters, but Margaret stood firm. By evening, local news vans parked outside. Someone had leaked the story of a prominent businessman trying to force his elderly mother from her home on Christmas. "They want to interview you," Sarah said, watching from the window. "No," Margaret replied. "This isn't about publicity. This is about family. What it means, what it should be." Ashley brought in hot chocolate for everyone. "The storm's getting worse again. Roads are still closed." "Good," Margaret said. "We have plans to make." She spread James's letter on the table. "This house was built for family. Not just any family, a true family. One built on love, not obligation. One that chooses to stay together, not driven apart by greed." "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked. "I'm thinking it's time to honor your father's wishes. This house is too big for one person, but perfect for a community. A place where no one has to be alone on Christmas or any other day. Emma's eyes lit up. Like a big family house? Like a home, Margaret corrected. For people who need one. As they talked into the night, making plans and sharing stories, Margaret felt James's presence stronger than ever. Outside, his Christmas star still shone in the window, guiding the way home for anyone who needed it. The lawyers could send their letters. Michael could make his threats. But Margaret Sullivan had found her second wind, and this time she wasn't fighting alone. 3 weeks after Christmas, Margaret's house buzzed with activity. Volunteers from the community moved furniture, painted walls, and transformed rooms into cozy gathering spaces. The news story about Michael's attempted takeover had sparked unexpected support. Mrs. Sullivan, Betty Wilson, called from the front door. The senior center sent over more chairs for the common room. Margaret smiled as she watched her once quiet home come alive. Sarah worked alongside the volunteers, 6 weeks sober and determined to make amends. She'd taken charge of coordinating donations and supplies. "Mom," Sarah said, checking her clipboard, "the inspector's coming tomorrow to verify we meet all the codes for a community center." "Good," Margaret replied. "And the zoning meeting?" "Next Tuesday, but some neighbors are fighting it." Right on cue, Martha Jenkins from across the street marched up the driveway. "Margaret Sullivan, this is a residential neighborhood, not a homeless shelter." "Nobody's homeless, Martha," Margaret responded calmly. "We're creating a place where generations can connect, like neighborhoods used to be." "It'll bring down property values," Martha insisted. "The neighborhood association." "Already approved it," Sarah interrupted, showing Martha the paperwork. 4-1 vote. Emma, who had convinced her parents to stay in town and help with the project, recorded everything on her tablet. "This is going in the documentary," she announced. "I'm calling it The House That Love Rebuilt." Martha huffed away just as David arrived with more volunteers. "The security system's installed," he reported. "And I've got 5 more tech experts willing to teach computer classes to seniors." "Perfect," Margaret said. "Ashley's already lined up reading buddies for the after-school program." The renovation continued despite the opposition. Margaret used James's hidden account to fund the essential repairs, while community donations covered the rest. Each room took on new purpose. The formal dining room became a gathering space, the library transformed into a tutoring center, and the sunroom turned into an art studio. But not everyone supported the change. One morning, Margaret found her mailbox full of complaint letters from neighbors. Some called her project a nuisance. Others questioned her mental stability. "Don't let them stop us," Emma said, finding Margaret reading the letters. "Look what we filmed yesterday." The tablet showed elderly Mr. Peterson teaching 2 young boys how to play chess in the new game room. Another clip captured former English teacher Mrs. Rodriguez helping a teenager with college application essays. "That's what this place is about," Emma declared. "Not property values." Sarah brought in the mail, including another legal threat from Michael's lawyers. But this time, Margaret just added it to her growing file of evidence. "The contractors fixed the leak in the east wing," Sarah reported. "But we found more water damage." "Use the emergency fund," Margaret decided. "This has to be done right." Ashley arrived with news from the school board. "They've approved our after-school partnership. We can start next month." As Margaret watched her new family work together, she remembered James's words about the house being filled with love again. He would have loved seeing the children playing in the yard, seniors sharing stories on the porch, and people of all ages finding connection within these walls. The day ended with an impromptu gathering in the kitchen. Volunteers shared pizza while planning the next day's work. Emma edited her documentary footage while Ethan taught Mr. Peterson how to use a smartphone. "Margaret," Ashley said quietly, "the news reporter is back. She wants to know how it feels to turn personal betrayal into community triumph." "Tell her there's no betrayal anymore," Margaret replied. "Only transformation." Later that night, alone in her room, Margaret found an old photo of Michael as a child, helping James plant the garden. Somewhere along the way, her son had lost his way. But as she looked out at her transformed home, she realized sometimes you had to let go of the family you thought you needed to find the family you were meant to have. The house creaked and settled, filled with new purpose. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, and undoubtedly more opposition. But Margaret Sullivan was ready. After all, she had a family again, bigger and more diverse than she'd ever imagined, but just as real as the one she'd raised within these walls. The smell of smoke woke Margaret at 3 a.m. Orange flames flickered through the east wing windows, where the new senior activity center was nearly complete. Fire! She hit the emergency alert system David had installed. Alarms blared through the house as smoke filled the hallways. Sarah, who had been sleeping over, rushed to help evacuate the 3 elderly residents who had already moved in. Ashley and David, staying late to finish painting, guided everyone to safety. "Mom, get out now," Sarah screamed from the front lawn. But Margaret ran to the office instead. James's letters, the legal documents, the proof of Michael's fraud, everything they needed was in the filing cabinet. As she grabbed the files, a figure appeared in the doorway. Michael stood there, staring at the flames spreading behind him. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said, his voice shaking. "I just wanted to scare everyone away. The developers, they're threatening to back out." "You set this fire?" Margaret clutched the files to her chest. "Your own home? It's not a home anymore. You're turning it into some kind of circus, and I need that money." Sarah appeared behind him. "Mike, what have you done?" Fire trucks wailed in the distance. Smoke poured through the hallway. "Both of you out. Now!" Margaret commanded, her teacher's voice cutting through their argument. They barely made it outside before the east wing roof collapsed. Firefighters fought the blaze while Margaret watched years of work turn to ash. "I called the police," David said, holding up his phone. "I got everything on video, the confession, all of it." Michael fell to his knees as police cars pulled up. "Mom, please, I can explain." But Margaret turned away, focusing instead on comforting Mrs. Chen, one of their elderly residents who was crying about losing her new home. "We'll rebuild," Margaret promised her. "We're not giving up." As the police led Michael away in handcuffs, Sarah hugged her mother. "I found this in my old room," she said, pulling out a singed photo album. "Dad's pictures are safe." Dawn broke over the smoking ruins. News crews arrived, capturing the scene as firefighters declared the East Wing a total loss. But the main house, built solid by James's hands, still stood. "Margaret," William's voice cut through the crowd. Her youngest son pushed past reporters, still wearing hospital scrubs. "I came as soon as I heard. I've been so wrong about everything." 3 people could have died, Margaret said quietly. "Your brother." "I know. I saw the video David posted. The hospital board saw it too." William swallowed hard. "I've resigned. What I did with those research grants covering for Michael, it has to stop." Emma moved through the scene with her tablet, documenting everything. Her video of Michael's confession had already gone viral. "Mrs. Sullivan," a reporter called out, "what will you do now?" Before Margaret could answer, Betty Wilson stepped forward. "I'll tell you what we'll do. We're going to rebuild. This is our community center now, not just Margaret's project." Neighbors emerged from their houses, even Martha Jenkins, bringing coffee and blankets for the displaced residents. "Mom," Sarah said, "look at this." Her phone showed social media exploding with support. A local contractor offered free repair services. A furniture store pledged to replace everything lost. The fire department says it could have been much worse, David reported. The sprinkler system we installed last week contained most of the damage. Ashley put her arm around Margaret. Maybe this is what it took to bring the whole community together. Margaret surveyed the scene, her children's betrayal and redemption playing out in front of news cameras, neighbors who had opposed her now offering help, strangers pledging support online. "We start rebuilding tomorrow," she announced. "Anyone who wants to help is welcome." As the sun rose higher, Margaret thought of James. He'd always said every ending was just a new beginning in disguise. Looking at the faces surrounding her, Sarah, William, Ashley, the volunteers, the neighbors, she knew he was right. The house would rise again, stronger than before. And this time, the whole community would help build it. Emma's video of the fire and Michael's confession hit 5 million views overnight. News vans camped outside the Sullivan house as reporters covered what they called the Christmas miracle gone wrong. "Look at these comments," Emma said, showing her tablet to Margaret. "People want to help from all over the country." Margaret barely had time to process it all. Her phone rang constantly with interview requests and donation offers. Even national morning shows wanted to feature her story. "Mrs. Sullivan," a suited man announced, walking up the driveway. "I'm Richard Parker from Sunrise Senior Living. We'd like to buy your concept and expand it nationwide." "Not interested," Margaret replied without hesitation. "We're talking millions of dollars," he persisted. "Let the professionals handle this." Sarah stepped forward. "My mother said no. This isn't a franchise opportunity." More corporate offers followed. Development companies, senior care chains, and investment groups all wanted to commercialize Margaret's idea. Each time, she refused. "But why, Mom?" William asked during dinner. He'd taken a leave from the hospital to help with rebuilding. "Think of how many people we could help with that kind of money. Because it's not about money," Margaret explained. "It's about community. Real connections. You can't franchise that." The renovation continued at an amazing pace. Local businesses donated materials, contractors volunteered their weekends, even Martha Jenkins brought her church group to help paint. Then Michael's confession went viral again. "Mom," Sarah rushed in with her laptop, "you need to see this." The video showed Michael in his jail cell, speaking directly to the camera. "I lost everything," he said, tears streaming down his face. "My company, my freedom, my family's trust. And for what? Money. The same greed that destroyed my father's dreams almost destroyed his legacy." Emma's documentary footage played next, showing the community center's impact before the fire. Seniors teaching kids to bake, veterans sharing stories, lonely people finding purpose. "That's what my father wanted," Michael continued. "Not million-dollar developments. He wanted a place where people belonged. I was too blind to see it." The video ended with a plea for donations to rebuild. Not to Michael, but directly to the Community Center Fund. "It's been shared over 1 million times," Sarah reported. "Donations are pouring in." Margaret sat down hard. "Have you talked to him?" "He's accepting a plea deal," William said. "Community service instead of prison time." The judge was impressed by his confession. Ashley arrived with more news. "The school board wants to make us an official alternative learning site, and the senior center is sending all their programs here once we rebuild." Speaking of rebuilding, David added, "Local contractors are having a competition to see who can contribute the most work hours. We might be done ahead of schedule." Emma's tablet pinged with another notification. "The Today Show wants to do a live broadcast from here next week." "Tell them yes," Margaret decided, "but only if they focus on the community, not me." The publicity brought unexpected support. A national hardware chain donated supplies. A furniture company offered to fully equip the new East Wing. Senior advocacy groups wanted to study their program as a model for fighting isolation among the elderly. "Mrs. Sullivan," Emma called from the front door. "Remember those corporate people who wanted to buy us out? They're back." Richard Parker stood with his team, looking uncomfortable. "We've reconsidered our approach. Instead of buying you out, we'd like to donate. No strings attached. Your vision was right. We were wrong." Later that night, Margaret sat in James's old chair, watching the construction lights illuminate the workers still going strong despite the late hour. Sarah brought her tea. "You know what Dad would say about all this?" Sarah smiled. "He'd say sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what you really have." Margaret looked at the growing pile of donation checks on her desk, then at the volunteers working outside, and finally at the family photos on her wall. Old and new faces together. "No," she replied. "We didn't lose everything. We just made room for more." The sounds of rebuilding echoed through the night, each hammer blow a reminder that sometimes the greatest dreams don't come with dollar signs, but with open doors and open hearts. The weather service alert blared through everyone's phones at once. Severe winter storm warning. Expect 2 feet of snow and dangerous conditions. Seek shelter immediately. Margaret looked at the 30 people gathered in the newly rebuilt community center. Seniors from the day program, kids from after-school activities, and volunteers. The East Wing had just reopened last week. "We can't send them home in this," Sarah said, watching the snow already piling up. "The roads are getting dangerous." "Then they'll stay," Margaret decided. "We have emergency supplies and plenty of room." The power flickered as wind rattled the windows. David checked his weather radar app. This storm's worse than predicted. We could be stuck here for days. Ashley organized the children into groups, keeping them calm with games and stories. The seniors shared their experiences of past blizzards, turning fear into adventure for the younger ones. Then the power went out completely. "Everyone stay calm," Margaret called out. "The emergency generator should—" A loud crack interrupted her as a tree branch crashed through one of the east wing windows. Snow and freezing wind whipped inside. "Get everyone to the main house." Sarah took charge, leading the evacuation through dark hallways. William, who had been helping with medical checks, grabbed his kit. "Mrs. Chen needs her medication. It's still in the East Wing office." "I'll get it," Margaret said, but William stopped her. "No, Mom, I'm going." He disappeared into the darkness before she could argue. Minutes passed. The wind howled. William didn't return. David's security system showed the East Wing temperature dropping rapidly. The broken window, that section could freeze. The pipes. "My son is in there." Margaret moved toward the connecting door. "Mrs. Sullivan, wait," Emma called out. "Look," her tablet showed the security camera feed. William was trapped. The damaged window had caused a section of roof to sag, blocking the hallway. He had Mrs. Chen's medication but couldn't get back. Sarah immediately called emergency services. "They can't get through. The roads are completely blocked." "There's another way," Ashley said suddenly. "The old servants' stairs, behind the kitchen. They connect to the East Wing through the basement." Margaret led Ashley and David through the pitch-black basement, their phone lights casting shadows. They found the hidden stairs, unused for decades. "William," Margaret called up the narrow stairwell. "Can you hear us?" "Mom, the door's stuck." David and Ashley pushed while Margaret pulled from the other side. The ancient door finally gave way. William practically fell through, shivering but clutching the medicine bag. "The whole wing is freezing over. We need to shut off the water main or the pipes will burst." They worked their way to the utility room, fighting through wind and darkness. David located the main valve just as the first pipe burst above them. "Run!" Margaret shouted. They barely made it back through the basement as more pipes exploded behind them. In the main house, Sarah had organized everyone into the living room. Flashlights and battery lanterns created islands of light. Seniors wrapped in blankets shared space with children on makeshift beds. The medicine. Mrs. Chen started worrying. "Right here," William handed her the pills, his doctor's calm taking over. "Everyone's going to be fine." Through the night, their unlikely family pulled together. Those with medical training checked on the elderly. Kids helped distribute supplies. Everyone shared stories and songs to keep spirits up. Emma documented everything on her tablet until the battery died. "This is better than any documentary," she whispered to Margaret. "This is real." By morning, the storm had buried the house in snow. The East Wing was basically an ice cave. But in the main house, warmed by emergency heaters and human kindness, 30 people had become one family. "We'll need to rebuild." Again, Sarah said, surveying the damage. Margaret watched Mr. Peterson teaching kids to play chess by flashlight, while Mrs. Rodriguez led a group sing-along, and William checked blood pressures. "No," she replied, "we just need to fix the building. The real house, the family we're building here, that's stronger than ever." Outside, the storm raged on. But inside James's house, his dream of a true home lived on, weathering every storm that came its way. Michael stood at the front door, thinner than Margaret remembered, holding a cardboard box of belongings from his jail cell. His release had come early due to good behavior and the judge's appreciation of his community service plan. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "I know I should have called first." Margaret looked at her eldest son, the boy who once helped James build the garden wall, now a man humbled by his own mistakes. "Come in," she said. "There are some conditions we need to discuss." Inside, the community center buzzed with its usual activity. A group of seniors worked on laptops in the computer lab, while kids did homework in the study room. Michael took it all in silently. "Your old room is now Mrs. Chen's art studio," Margaret explained. "She teaches watercolor to the children." "I saw the news coverage," Michael said. "What you've built here, it's amazing." Sarah emerged from the office, stopping short when she saw her brother. 6 months sober now, she'd become the center's administrative director. "Michael?" She crossed her arms. "You're early. Parole board meeting isn't until next week." Good behavior, he shrugged. I've been thinking a lot about Dad, about what this house really means. William arrived for his weekly volunteer medical clinic, his hospital badge replaced by a community center ID. He paused in the doorway, then walked straight to Michael and hugged him. Welcome home, brother. Ready to actually help this time? Margaret laid out her terms clearly. If you want to be part of this family again, you'll start at the bottom. Volunteer work, community service, rebuilding trust. I understand. Michael nodded. The corporate world, the deals, the money, it all seems so empty now. Emma burst in with her ever-present tablet. Mrs. Sullivan, the grant committee is here and… Oh. She stopped, recognizing Michael from her viral video. Hello, Emma, Michael said. Your documentary. It opened my eyes, made me face what I'd become. Ashley gathered everyone in the conference room, once the formal dining room where the Sullivan family had shared holidays. The grant committee waited to hear their expansion plans. Before we start, Margaret announced, I want to introduce my son Michael. He'll be sharing his perspective on why this project matters. Michael stood, hands shaking slightly. A year ago, I tried to destroy this place for money. I thought success meant profit margins and development deals. I was wrong. Real success is what my mother built here, a place where everyone belongs. The committee members leaned forward, intrigued. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Michael continued. I'm asking for a chance to help, to honor my father's memory by supporting his real dream, not luxury condos, but a true home for people who need one. After the meeting, Sarah showed Michael the renovation plans. We're adding a job training center in the basement. People need purpose, not just a place to gather. I might know something about business planning, Michael offered hesitantly. If you want help with that. One step at a time, Sarah smiled. Start by painting the new classroom with us tomorrow. That evening, Margaret found Michael in James's study, now a library filled with children's books and senior reading groups. Dad would have loved this, he said softly. All those years he spent up here, he was planning something like this, wasn't he? He was planning for us to find our way home, Margaret replied. Some just took longer than others. As they talked into the night, the sound of community center activities echoed through the house. Choir practice in the living room, a chess tournament in the game room, teenagers getting homework help in the study hall. It's loud, Michael observed. It's alive, Margaret corrected. Like a home should be. Outside her window, Margaret could see Sarah helping William unload medical supplies for tomorrow's clinic. Emma edited her latest documentary footage, while Ashley prepared the next day's activities. The house that had once felt too empty now burst with purpose. Welcome home, Michael, Margaret said finally. The real work begins tomorrow. Michael nodded, understanding that redemption, like family, had to be rebuilt one day at a time. The National Community Service Award ceremony filled the local convention center. Margaret sat in the front row, surrounded by her family, both biological and chosen. Sarah, William, and Michael sat to her right, while Ashley, David, and the twins flanked her left. And the recipient of this year's Lifetime Achievement Award, the announcer's voice boomed, for innovative community building and senior care, Margaret Sullivan. The crowd erupted in applause as Margaret made her way to the stage. Emma's documentary footage played on the giant screens, showing the journey from that lonely Christmas Eve to today. A year ago, Margaret began her speech. I thought I'd lost everything. My husband was gone. My children were strangers. My home felt empty. The cameras panned to Michael, who nodded encouragingly. But sometimes, she continued, what looks like an ending is really a beginning. Our community center didn't just save me, it saved all of us. Sarah, now 1 year sober, wiped tears from her eyes. William held her hand, his own journey from ethical compromise to community service complete. Michael stood in the back, managing the center's new job training program with the dedication he once gave to corporate deals. After the ceremony, Ashley pulled Margaret aside. We have news, she beamed. The doctor confirmed it yesterday. Twins again. Twins? Margaret gasped. James would be so happy. He always said this house needed more children's laughter. Emma rushed up with her tablet. Wait until you see this. The documentary is finished. Can we show it at the center's Christmas party? Speaking of the party, Sarah interrupted. You won't believe how many people RSVP'd. we might need to use the garden tent. The community center had grown beyond anyone's expectations. The job training program helped seniors share their skills while giving purpose to those who felt forgotten. The after-school program had expanded to include mentoring and college prep. Even Martha Jenkins now led the senior yoga classes. Back at home, Margaret found a surprise waiting. The Christmas star that James had hung in the window 40 years ago had been carefully restored and lit. "Michael did it," William explained. "He spent weeks working with that old electrician who comes to computer class." The house glowed with warmth as volunteers decorated for the holidays. Mrs. Chen's art students had made ornaments. The cooking class prepared traditional recipes from different cultures. The choir practiced carols in the music room. "Mom," Michael called from James's study. "Look what I found behind Dad's old desk." He held up a manila envelope marked "For the Future." Inside was a detailed sketch of the house, transformed into exactly what it had become. A community center with multiple purposes, spaces for all ages, rooms full of life and learning. "The date," Sarah pointed out. "Dad drew this 20 years ago." "He always knew," Margaret smiled. "He was just waiting for us to figure it out." Emma's voice carried from the hallway. "Everyone come quick. Ashley's water broke." The next few hours turned into beautiful chaos. While Ashley labored in the hospital, the community center family pulled together. Seniors watched Ethan and Emma. The cooking class prepared meals for David's long hospital stay. The maintenance crew set up a nursery in Ashley's old office. Just before midnight, David called with the news. 2 healthy girls, Hope and Grace. 4 sets of twins in this house now, Margaret mused, looking at the old photos of her own twins who came to classes at the center. Sarah hugged her mother. And about 100 honorary grandchildren. The Christmas star shone bright in the window as Margaret walked through her transformed home. In the game room, Michael taught chess to a teenager from his job training program. William's medical clinic had expanded to 3 days a week. Sarah's administrative skills had turned their program into a model for other communities. Standing in the doorway of what was once her formal living room, now a space where children did homework while seniors told stories, Margaret felt James's presence stronger than ever. "You were right, dear," she whispered. "Family isn't about blood, it's about love. And love just keeps growing." Christmas Eve at the Sullivan Community Center looked nothing like that lonely night 1 year ago. The house overflowed with people, laughter, and the kind of joy that only comes from true belonging. "Places everyone," Emma called out, her tablet ready to capture the moment. The Christmas special is about to air. The National News Network had chosen their center for their annual American Spirit broadcast. Families gathered around the big screen in the main room, while more people filled every available space. Live from Millbrook, Connecticut, the announcer began, where one woman's loss became an entire community's gain. Emma's documentary played first, showing the center's journey. The footage captured it all. The betrayal, the fire, the rebuilding, the storms, and finally, the triumph. "Mom," Sarah whispered, "look who's here." Martha Jenkins walked in with her entire neighborhood association, carrying trays of food. "We were wrong," she announced. "This center didn't bring down our property values. It raised the value of our lives." Michael stood to address the crowd. "A year ago, I stood in this room with nothing but greed in my heart. Today, I stand here humbled and grateful. Our job training program has helped 50 seniors find new purpose and 30 unemployed people find work." William added his own update. "The medical clinic now serves over 200 patients a month. We're partnering with the hospital to expand services next year." Sarah, proud in her 1-year sobriety chip, shared news about their growth. 5 other communities have adopted our model. By next year, there will be 10 more centers like this across the country. Ashley arrived with her newborn twins, now 1 month old. The room erupted in joy as Hope and Grace were passed around like Christmas presents from one honorary grandparent to another. "Mrs. Sullivan," Emma called out, "you have to see this." Her tablet showed social media exploding with reactions to the broadcast. People from around the world commented on how the center had inspired them to start similar projects. "Time for the big surprise," David announced. The crowd parted as a large screen descended in the main room. Suddenly, faces appeared from centers across the country, all modeled after the Sullivan House. all broadcasting live. Merry Christmas from Chicago. Greetings from Atlanta. Love from Seattle. Each location showed seniors and children together, communities united, lives transformed. James's dream didn't just fill this house, Margaret realized. It's filling houses everywhere. The celebration continued into the night. The choir sang carols while kids helped seniors with their new tablets. The cooking class served traditional holiday dishes from a dozen cultures. The art students displayed their work in what was once the formal parlor. As midnight approached, Margaret stood in front of James's Christmas star, now a symbol recognized across the country. "Mom," Michael said softly, "I found one more thing in Dad's study." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter dated the week before James died. "My dearest Maggie, by the time you read this, our house will have become what it was always meant to be. Not just our home, but everyone's home. Our children will find their way back, not to the house, but to the values we tried to teach them. The money I saved isn't just for rebuilding walls, it's for rebuilding lives. The family we dreamed of didn't end with our 3 children. It grew to include everyone who needs love, purpose, and connection. You'll know when the time is right. You'll open our doors and the miracle will begin. All my love, James." Margaret looked around at her expanded family. Sarah helping a teenager with college applications, William checking on Mrs. Chen's blood pressure, Michael teaching business skills to a group of seniors, Ashley nursing the twins while Emma documented it all. "The miracle didn't happen to us," Margaret announced to the room. "We happened to each other." Outside, snow began to fall, just like that lonely Christmas Eve 1 year ago. But this time, no one felt lonely. The house that love rebuilt had become more than a building. It had become a beacon of hope, a testament to second chances, and proof that family isn't about blood, but about the choices we make and the love we share. The Christmas star shone brighter than ever, guiding the way home for anyone who needed it. Christmas Eve at the Sullivan Community Center looked nothing like that lonely night 1 year ago. The house overflowed with people, laughter, and the kind of joy that only comes from true belonging. "Places everyone," Emma called out, her tablet ready to capture the moment. The Christmas special is about to air. The National News Network had chosen their center for their annual American Spirit broadcast. Families gathered around the big screen in the main room, while more people filled every available space. "Live from Millbrook, Connecticut," the announcer began, "where one woman's loss became an entire community's gain." Emma's documentary played first, showing the center's journey. The footage captured it all. The betrayal, the fire, the rebuilding, the storms, and finally, the triumph. "Mom," Sarah whispered, "look who's here." Martha Jenkins walked in with her entire neighborhood association carrying trays of food. "We were wrong," she announced. "This center didn't bring down our property values. It raised the value of our lives." Michael stood to address the crowd. "A year ago, I stood in this room with nothing but greed in my heart. Today, I stand here humbled and grateful. Our job training program has helped 50 seniors find new purpose and 30 unemployed people find work." William added his own update. "The medical clinic now serves over 200 patients a month. We're partnering with the hospital to expand services next year." Sarah, proud in her 1-year sobriety chip, shared news about their growth. 5 other communities have adopted our model. By next year, there will be 10 more centers like this across the country. Ashley arrived with her newborn twins, now 1 month old. The room erupted in joy as hope and grace were passed around like Christmas presents from one honorary grandparent to another. "Mrs. Sullivan," Emma called out, "you have to see this." Her tablet showed social media exploding with reactions to the broadcast. People from around the world commented on how the center had inspired them to start similar projects. "Time for the big surprise," David announced. The crowd parted as a large screen descended in the main room. Suddenly, faces appeared from centers across the country, all modeled after the Sullivan House, all broadcasting live. "Merry Christmas from Chicago. Greetings from Atlanta. Love from Seattle." Each location showed seniors and children together, communities united, lives transformed. James's dream didn't just fill this house, Margaret realized. It's filling houses everywhere. The celebration continued into the night. The choir sang carols while kids helped seniors with their new tablets. The cooking class served traditional holiday dishes from a dozen cultures. The art students displayed their work in what was once the formal parlor. As midnight approached, Margaret stood in front of James's Christmas star, now a symbol recognized across the country. "Mom," Michael said softly, "I found one more thing in Dad's study." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter dated the week before James died. "My dearest Maggie, by the time you read this, our house will have become what it was always meant to be, not just our home, but everyone's home. Our children will find their way back, not to the house, but to the values we tried to teach them. The money I saved isn't just for rebuilding walls, it's for rebuilding lives. The family we dreamed of didn't end with our 3 children. It grew to include everyone who needs love, purpose, and connection. You'll know when the time is right. You'll open our doors, and the miracle will begin. All my love, James." Margaret looked around at her expanded family. Sarah helping a teenager with college applications, William checking on Mrs. Chen's blood pressure, Michael teaching business skills to a group of seniors, Ashley nursing the twins while Emma documented it all. "The miracle didn't happen to us," Margaret announced to the room. "We happened to each other." Outside, snow began to fall, just like that lonely Christmas Eve 1 year ago. But this time, no one felt lonely. The house that love rebuilt had become more than a building. It had become a beacon of hope, a testament to second chances, and proof that family isn't about blood, but about the choices we make and the love we share. The Christmas star shone brighter than ever, guiding the way home for anyone who needed it. What did you think of Margaret's incredible journey? If her story of love, forgiveness, and building a true family touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up. Share in the comments below how you would have handled that lonely Christmas Eve. Would you have given up or fought to create something beautiful like she did? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that prove it's never too late for miracles. Remember, sometimes the family we choose becomes the miracle we need.